Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is using your needs assessment to plan for action. And my goal today is really to kind of remind you of the foundations of the health equity conceptual framework that we're working with, as well as the class standard foundations that we went through in session 2. And then talk about how you would leverage your needs assessment to plan for your action plan, and some tools to select strategies. So just as a reminder, this is super tiny font, but this is the conceptual framework, and I sent it to you in an email. You've gotten it in several emails. This is the conceptual framework that the DC Hospital Association endorsed. And so it was kind of our foundation so that very intentionally, as you're doing your work in your institutions, that your hospital leadership has already endorsed this framework, so that hopefully the work that you're trying to do in the diversity, equity, inclusion, justice space, you will be able to show alignment with what they have endorsed and said that they want to do. So that was an intentional choice to try to help you have a point of reference that leadership has already at least said that they were supporting. And again, the pillars of that framework are accountability, mitigating bias, diversifying leadership, developing workforce pipelines, purchase and investing locally, and addressing social needs. And my canine colleagues want to come into the room, so apologies for that slight interruption. And then in session 2, Dr. Lewis Ragland went through this in her own way, but the culturally and linguistically appropriate standards have the following pillars. There's a general standard, there's a pillar for governance, leadership, and workforce, communication and language assistance, and engagement, continuous improvement and accountability. So this converges pretty well with the DC Hospital Association conceptual framework, but there's like specific metrics that have been there for decades that I think every institution in the country could probably do better. So the principal standard is to provide effective, equitable, understandable, and respectful quality care and services that are responsive to diverse cultural health beliefs and practices, preferred languages, health literacy, and other communication needs. And in terms of governance and workforce, the focus is on governance and leadership that promote culturally and linguistically appropriate standards and health equity, looking at policy practices and allocated resources. So that's really what we've tried to walk you through in the last 4 sessions in terms of your organizational assessment and just getting a sense of what is currently happening in your institution related to cancer equity and broader institutional health equity, for you to kind of prioritize where you want to act and try to make some changes in the year ahead. Recruiting, promoting, and supporting a culturally and linguistically diverse governance, leadership, and workforce that are responsive to the population in our service area, and ongoing education and training to work toward those goals for culturally and linguistically appropriate policies and practices. For communication and language assistance is something that, I mean, I know at my institution, there are Blue phones available, but that process is sometimes not perfect. And so making sure that there's consistent language assistance to people who prefer to have services in another language or need to have services in another language, and that people who are providing that assistance have a competency in providing language assistance. And making sure that we're responsive, not expecting patients to understand everything both in English and in doctor speak, but that we are able to really communicate clearly in patients' preferred language verbally and in writing, and clearly in terms that people understand that may not be working in the health system every day. So continuous improvement and accountability, culturally and linguistically appropriate goals, policy, and management accountability. So one thing that I took away from the American Hospital Association Health Equity meeting in Minneapolis a few weeks ago was the suggestion to really align what you're doing with a strategic imperative, so that it's not a side project, it's not something that could be cut from the budget, but it is If your leadership says they want to achieve X, how is what you're doing aligning with that so that it becomes hard to get rid of? So I think that that goes with accountability, conducting ongoing assessments of activities. That's what we tried to work with the organizational assessment. Happy to get feedback. I know it wasn't a perfect process. And making sure that we have accurate and reliable demographic data, because it's hard to measure what we're doing if we don't have accurate and reliable demographic data to say where we are now and where we are in the future. So in terms of helping to advance class standards in your setting, reminding people of the standards, providing and supporting effective, equitable, respective services, being responsive to cultural beliefs and practices, and provision of services in a patient's preferred language, and supporting health literacy to make sure that we are explaining things clearly, effectively, and compassionately. And this is a video, hopefully it will play. You may have seen it before, but I think it's really powerful. It's from the Cleveland Clinic. Hopefully this will play okay. So I don't know how many of you have watched that previously, but it man, that hit me a little harder this time. Strategies for communicating with empathy.
Mandy, I
Yeah.
know that you're really trying to do this for us, but you don't have to.
It's okay.
You're
It's
human
important.
too.
It's important. It was that last visit at the hospital part. Um, these are just some strategies. Thank you. These are just some strategies for communicating with equity, including your body, your nonverbal behaviors, eye contact, muscle of facial expression, posture, affect, tone of voice, and really listening. And again, all of these, I know that you guys already know. It's just sometimes we have to remind ourselves to slow down, speak clearly, encourage patience, try to avoid slang and idioms because sometimes they just don't translate or someone doesn't understand them. Avoid humor until you know if it's okay and how it's okay. Avoid asking 2 questions at once. I do this all the time, but just so that comprehension is clear. Avoid asking negative questions. Consider writing down something if you think it might not be clear. Take turns in the conversation and listen fully, and then summarize and repeat what's been said. In terms of ethics in the healthcare system, you know, again, these are things I know that you know, but just it's nice to have reminders that patients have. We want to respect the rights and dignity of patients, respect clinician judgments and work as a team, provide optimal clinical care to each patient, avoid imposing non-clinical risks and burdens on patients, really focus on health equities, that's what we're trying to do with this work, really, fundamentally. Conduct continuous learning activities and contribute to a common purpose of improving the quality and value of your system. Oops, I think I went backward. Sorry about that. So as you reflect on, hopefully you got a chance to read the Golden article. I think it's a really helpful one. It's something I actually read in graduate school that I recommend to people, and that doesn't happen. I think it's the only article that I've read in graduate school that I recommend to people because it kind of helps you think about how to implement and what the ingredients are. And so just kind of reflecting on what if you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it, and then thinking about the sessions we've been through, how to increase buy-in for the work. So some things that the article talks about is like being really clear about your desired end state. Like, what do you want the system to look like? What do you want to achieve? And then, is your system ready for that? And if not, how can you improve the readiness for change? How do you broaden support? Because we can't do any of this alone. And how do we reinforce and sustain change? And this was one of the most powerful figures. I mean, I don't think this article is super popular. Like, I don't, other than grad school, I haven't really seen it anywhere, but this was super helpful to me to think about what you actually need for change to happen. If you have skills, incentive, resources, and an action plan, you might have a whole lot of different activities going on, but not a clear vision. You would have confusion. If you have a vision, incentive, resources, and an action plan, you might have anxiety because people don't have the skills that they need to actually implement the plan. If you don't have incentives to actually incorporate your plan, but you have everything else, then you may have gradual change because there's not something really pushing you, you know, and incentivizing the folks at the table to really make change. If you don't have resources, but you have vision, skills, incentive, and an action plan, you probably will be frustrated. If you have everything except an action plan, you might have a false start because you don't really know what to do next. And that's really what we're trying to do today, is get you launched with an action plan. So that if you have really the vision of where you want to go, the skills on the team to get there, the incentive to get there, resources to succeed, and your action plan, then that's really a recipe for change. So I'd love for you as teams to think about your organizational assessment data and your own personal implicit attitudes assessment data. I haven't looked at the baseline data, and it's not, you don't have identifiers that are linked to you personally. So that's not something that I don't know how you all feel about that, but just reflecting on your own test results and your team organizational data. What does that say about this recipe for change? What does that say about the vision, skills, incentive, resources that you have available? And then how do we draft those action plans so that they are, so SMARTY stands for specific, measurable, I always forget the A, if it's accessible, achievable, relevant, time bound, and then increasingly, I've encouraged my team to include the I and the E, inclusive and equitable. So some examples, again, I took these from the American Hospital Association Health Equity meeting, which was a fantastic meeting. These were some things that were tangible strategies that were talked about at that meeting. One was optimizing race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity data. And some of the processes that this person talked about was optimizing data collection through patient self-report, not making assumptions, examining the completeness and integrity of the data, publishing an annual report to keep you monitoring what's happening, and identifying quality improvement projects. And actually, this is a really cool campaign that I just learned about. It's from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, but the person who presented this adapted this information also for sexual orientation and gender identity, and she's going to be presenting in November, I believe, to you. I have on one of the last slides a schedule of subject matter experts that you'll have access to. But I really loved this campaign because they used it to create patient materials, to create information on the website, information in the clinic, to really explain, why are we asking these questions? We're asking because we care, because if we don't ask, we don't know how we're doing. Another thing I thought was really powerful was another institution embedded discrimination reporting into their electronic health record. So they actually had a place in the EHR. So if you clicked on racism, discrimination, this balance scale sign, there was a form where you could input information about professional misconduct or an encounter where you felt like there was discrimination happening, and that actually was documented and reported so that it could be acted on. And there was, I mean, that's part of accountability. And then this was kind of their workflow that a report was filed with the racism discrimination tag, quality triage to the appropriate department. The department investigated and did a consult for the situation. And then the consult equity medical director and director of equity and care were brought in as needed. And then resources were provided to follow up with the person who filed the report and to remedy the situation. So that was kind of what they did. This is super hard to read, I know, but what I'm going to do is pull up. So with support from Joe on my team and some of the team at MedStar, I've tried to, I'm looking for my Excel sheet here. I tried to take some strategies. This is not comprehensive, but what I tried to do was take strategies that I got from the kind of drafted from the health equity conceptual framework and also from the American Hospital Association meeting I attended, and give you some just ideas so that if you in your organizational assessment, let's say in this A column, you scored low on having mechanisms in place to stratify utilization patterns and health outcomes by race and ethnicity. I've provided a column here for you to kind of prioritize based on your score or your feedback for that question. How high, like, what's the priority level for addressing that? Is that really high? Is it the highest it could be is that you're doing pretty well. So maybe not something that's really critical to focus on. But this column B gives you a place to put whatever level the priority might be for that particular question. And then depending on the priority level, I've added some strategies, and there's cross-cutting strategies such as obtaining leadership buy-in, advocating and supporting change, defining structure and process measures that drive toward achievement of outcomes, convening cross-departmental teams, holding team members accountable, integrating implicit bias training. So I'm not going to read all of them, but it gives you a sense of, regardless of the priority that you choose, all of these cross-cutting strategies hopefully would be helpful. And again, as with everything, we're kind of making, like, flying the plane as we go, making the plane, building the plane as we fly, I guess is the right expression. And so I am very happy to get feedback on any of this that feels too vague or doesn't make sense or you think could be improved. And then specific strategies. So for the one I mentioned, optimizing capture of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, and other demographic data, using input from staff and clinicians, creating a health equity dashboard. These are some specific strategies that you might use. So what I tried to do at the top was give you an example. So if you had this as a high priority, have mechanisms in place, let's say you decide your strategy was defining a structure and process to drive advances in health equity. And then what I tried to do in these other columns was give you kind of a prompt to make this more specific so that as you move across D, E, F, G, you're working on the SMARTY kind of component of the goal. So specific is the S, measurable is the M, actionable is the A, relevant is the R, time bound, so giving yourself a deadline, is it as inclusive and equitable as it can be, and then any resources that we found that maybe will help you. So this evolved from defining a structure and process to measure and drive advances in health equity, to defining a structure and process to drive advances in health equity for our patient population at risk for and diagnosed with cancer, to defining a structure and process measures to drive advances in health equity for our patient population at risk for and diagnosed with cancer by establishing a cross-disciplinary team to guide and implement, I'm sorry, there's a typo there, to guide and implement a health equity dashboard to inform continuous quality improvement. And then finally, to put a measure on that to within 12 months. So I was trying to kind of model how you might use this Excel sheet to hopefully give you some ideas. I realize that you're not going to be able to do 100 things. So this is why using your organizational assessment data and saying, okay, what feels most critical to implement in the next 12 months and what's most feasible, and then where do we start, knowing that we always are going to have more to do. And then I also provided in your email this team charter, and I stole this too from someone at the American Hospital Association's meeting. There were so many great resources there. This is a tool to just, it's optional, but I encourage you as a team to fill it out because what it can give you some clarity again on your, oh, sorry, I think someone may, if you can mute yourself, on who is at the table on your team, what your vision is for that recipe for change. So your clear purpose, what you specifically want to achieve. And this is something that Hannah mentioned that's a really important point. Make sure you designate a chair in charge of convening your group so that you have a designated leader for your work, not because you're not all really critically important, but just to keep you so that someone has the task. Someone has is tasked with convening you and making sure that you keep moving forward. So agree on that and find a champion that you mutually feel is okay to chair your task force for the next year. Clarify expectations. What do you expect each of your members on your team to do so that you're successful and you feel like you're sharing the load and moving things forward? Defining your policies and procedures for change, how you're going to make decisions, how you'll deal with conflict, because it always comes up, right? How you're going to problem solve, how you're going to track improvement, and what you're going to do if someone changes jobs or there's a new person that comes in that would be a really important part of the team. and how you'll make changes to the charter and your timeline. And then you all can sign it and date it. This is a tool. You don't have to use it. I realize that between the strategies, Excel sheet, the charter, and the action plan, it's a little bit duplicative, but they're all intended to just, you all are adults, you're adult learners, you're smart at what you do, but they're just some tools to give you some guiding principles to try to help you be successful. Oops, hold on. So I canceled the July meeting because it's really close to a holiday. And I figured a lot of people would be out. What I would like is for you all to work for the next 20 minutes or so in breakout groups and kind of work on looking at your organizational assessment and thinking about what are the 3 areas, at least 3 areas, 3 to 5 areas you want to work on based on what you see in your organizational assessment, and how are you going to move forward. And then on August 2nd, I would like you to designate someone from your team or multiple people from your team to present your action plans to the group. Dr. Christopher King is going to be joining us that day. You heard from him in the 3rd session about the kind of history in DC, and he's an amazing resource at Georgetown, and I'll be there for each of these calls. But I'd like each of your teams to present your action plans, and then you can get feedback from the other teams in terms of things that maybe aren't clear or could be improved. And then what I decided to do, because I had such an amazing speakers that I saw at this health equity meeting, I've invited 4 speakers to present to you at some of these optional touch points. And Tess DeVos and Emily Thatcher from Dayton Children's is going to talk about utilizing staff and community perspectives to improve social needs screening and resource connection in September. Dr. Wang from Mass General Brigham had a wonderful presentation that I think was really great and could be a powerful tool for you guys on making the business case for diversity, equity, inclusion, justice. I kind of hate that we have to do that, but we work in businesses, so it's a tool that is helpful to be able to have some of that language. And then again, Morgan Black is the one that had the We Ask Because We Care campaign adapted for the Hospital Association of New York, and she's agreed to come and speak on November 1st. And then in December, we will be having you present your progress on your action plans. What have you been able to achieve? Where are you stuck? So the red dates are, I really want you to show up and attend. These are kind of mandatory checkpoints so that we can move forward collectively. And I hope that the optional checkpoints will be of interest to you. I'm actually interested to find out from you all if you think, I think we should potentially open up those talks to other people who might be interested in attending, because these folks have some pretty powerful experiences to share. And it might increase buy-in at your institutions as well. So I'm open to hearing if that's something that you might want to do. I also discovered this week. So this is kind of an extra bonus. If you need your institution to, if you need something to point to for your institution to help support your work, there is this NIH Institutional Excellence Award that they just launched. So you can go to that website and check it out, but there's an opportunity to show that you're working on diversity, equity, inclusion, and potentially get $1 million for your institution. So check that out. It might be an additional incentive. So before we break into groups, what questions do you all have based on what I presented? I hope that this was helpful. Is there anything I can clarify as you go into your teams and work on your action plans? I guess I will stop sharing. I sent these slides, but these are some references and you know how to reach me. I'm officially off Twitter now. I don't know if you saw that Elon continues to be anti-trans and not inclusive, and I don't want to be part of that system anymore. So I'm not on Twitter anymore. So you only have my email. Anything that I can answer or any questions